Welcome to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence. Today we're going to be studying Judges chapter 7. Judges chapter 7 is a continuation of the story of Gideon. We have one more chapter to go with Gideon, and then we're going to have one chapter that deals with his son. Today is the famous chapter, the one that we're kind of taught in Bible class and whatever, where Gideon is given a big army, and then he's told by God to pare it down into 300 men, and then he's able to go and conquer the Midianite army with what he has. So we're going to go through that, and then I'm going to stop. I don't want to bunch up the chapters all together and let them just continue on in one file. I like to kind of spread them out. So we're just going to do chapter 7 today. It's going to be a short chapter. So let's get started. Judges chapter 7 and verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, and that word means Baal, the god, is to make his case, because remember Gideon's dad was making fun of Baal and said, if he's really a god, let him make his case. And so they started calling his son Gideon that, Jerubbaal, but he mostly goes by Gideon. Jerubbaal is kind of one of those things, a nickname that the enemies give you, or whatever, that reminds you of a victory eventually, like we see with the Christians. They were called Christian by others. It wasn't necessarily a name that they had adopted for themselves, and it just kind of stuck and became a thing. So it's a reminder that Baal is really a fake god, rather than more of an insult to Gideon. But anyway, they called him Jerubbaal, but he goes by Gideon also. Said that, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And so remember, we're up in the, if you think about it, I'm going to try to do this in reverse for y'all. So you've got Egypt down here, and then you've got Judah, and the Gaza is over here, and then you've got the Jordan River kind of going up here, and then you have up here is Manasseh, where Gideon is at. And so all the children of the east, all over here in Saudi Arabia and whatever, we're really dealing with Ishmaelites and the Amalekites and the people that were kind of descended from Abraham, that were from Ishmael, and they're related to the Israelites, but very, very distant at this time. We're generations removed now from Abraham. I think it's something like 7 generations removed from Abraham. And then the Amalekites are one of those that were part of the nations that Abraham kind of moved among when he was here. So they're all up against that eastern side of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. That's what we're mainly dealing with. And you're going to see some of the nations, or some of the tribes, I should say, of Israel that are not under attack by them come and help. And it's kind of a reverse of what we saw when we were looking at Deborah and Balak. So anyway, it says, and Jehovah said unto Gideon, the people that are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand has saved me. So this is an interesting story that we see here. God chose Israel, this nation of not great people. They're not great in stature. They're smaller people. Everybody else around them is taller and more powerful, physically built. They have more wealth. They have all of these physical things that are an advantage. And then Jehovah says, it doesn't matter. I'm taking the weak and the small to show that I am God, and I can take the least and make them the greatest. And the type here, the pointing forward to the church, is that in that time when the church was being established, and even today, we see the people who are poor, the people who are the downtrodden, those who aren't necessarily the most popular people, or the strongest, or the best, or the whatever, as the world sees those things. And those are the ones that are saved. They're the ones that obey the gospel, that are able to humble themselves and choose to live as God would have us live, and to be saved. And so here we see this type or this pointer to what is going to be the reality of Christianity. And so in order to show that it is indeed Jehovah that does this, he's going to start pairing. He says, Gideon, you've got too many men, so we're gonna get rid of these, and we're gonna bring your army down to a smaller number. And so he says to Gideon, now therefore go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned to the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. So he had 22,000 people that were there following Gideon, that had been called out of Manasseh and out of some of the other tribes that were being harassed by the Midianites. And he had gathered a force of 22,000 people, which is a testament to Gideon's reputation, his leadership, that he was able to gather so many to fight back. But we're going to see that number is nothing compared to what they were up against. Remember, their armies, the enemies, the Midianites and those that were with them, numbered as grasshoppers. There was uncountable number of them. And so they're starting off with 22,000, and they send 12,000 of them home. So that there was 10,000 left. And then verse 4 says, and Jehovah said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many, bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. It shall be that of whom I say unto you, this shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and of whomsoever I say unto you, this shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So God says, bring them down to the water. I'm going to reduce their numbers further by doing a test. This isn't a temptation. This isn't something where God is causing them to do something where they have to choose between right and wrong. It's just, we're going to do a thing, and I'm going to tell you which ones to select and which ones to send home. And so we brought the people down, verse 5. So Gideon, brought the people down into the water. And Jehovah said unto Gideon, everyone that laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, him shall you set by himself. Likewise everyone that bows down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. So you have just this selection here, and God says, separate them based on that. And only 300 were down, scooping water up and kind of bringing it to their mouth. The rest of them had knelt down and were drinking the water from their knees. And so verse 7, and Jehovah said unto Gideon, by the 300, so he got that number. He was looking for the smallest amount of number, and he said, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand, and let all the other people go, every man into his place. He's like, send everybody else home. I only need these 300 to do this, and I'm going to show you that it is by my hand and not by your hand that this is going to be done. Now I want to bring up here the idea of the way that God is acting, because God is saying, I'm going to deliver these men into your hand. When God says those things, almost every time God says those things, he is talking providentially. Like when he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. It is not God supernaturally, directly reaching into the person and flipping some switch or whatever and making them or forcing them to do something. God does not override the free will of men, ever. But what he does do is he providentially is able to turn the course of events. And we're going to see a very great example of that here with just 300 men against hundreds of thousands of men is what we're going up against here. Okay, so it came to pass, and let's see here. Nope, verse 8. So the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man into his tent, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night that Jehovah said unto him, arise, go down into the host, for I have delivered it into your hand. So he's telling Gideon, go down by yourself. He's not telling him to take the 300. He's basically saying, Gideon, you need to go down and you need to scout. But if you are afraid to go by yourself, verse 10, then take Phurah with your servant with you down to the host. And so Gideon is allowed to be afraid. God says if you're afraid to go by yourself, then take your servant. It's okay. God understands that we have fear. God does not punish us for our fear. It's a natural part of us. It's a God designed thing where we have this thing in us that is for self preservation. So God is not punishing Gideon or chiding him for his fear. Fear is okay. It's when that fear, like when we go back to Numbers chapter 14 and the spies, it's when that fear drives you to do things that cause you to doubt God. Gideon obviously does not doubt God. He's doing exactly what God says in every case. He presses forward in spite of his fear, and that's great courage. And so God is being understanding, and he says, if you're afraid, it's okay. Take Pharaoh with you. And so that's what Gideon does. He takes his servant and he goes down to the host. And God tells him, you shall hear what they say, and afterwards shall your hands be strengthened to go down to the host. So God says, you're going to go down there and you're going to hear something, and it's going to give you the confidence to know that you're going to be able to do this. And so he goes down with Pharaoh his servant into the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. So we've heard that before, right? The fulfillment of the promise to Abraham that they were, the Israelites were going to number as the sea, the sand of the sea, or the sand on the beach, or the stars of heaven. And so this multitude, we're talking in terms of over 1 million soldiers here. That's how many people they're looking at. And when Gideon was come, verse 13, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came into a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay long. So he's like, I had this dream, man. It's this weird dream. You have this loaf of barley bread. It comes tumbling down into the host of Midian, and it comes into a tent, and it knocks the tent over. And his fellow's like, I know what that means. And he gives him an interpretation of the dream. He says, this is the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash. They've heard of him. They know who he is. They know that he's been leading this rebellion in Manasseh. And so his reputation is preceding him. And this guy says, that's the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. And into his hand, God has delivered Midian and all the host. So these two guys are talking. It's just two random guys that are talking, but Gideon overhears them. And he knows that God has sent the dream and the interpretation, and he hears it. And these two guys are just talking. They don't know Gideon's there. But Gideon hears them talking, and he hears that the success is going to be his through these random guys. And it is only God that is able to do this. Now, did God force these men? Did he force the one to tell the other the dream? Yeah, God gave him the dream, but the guy didn't have to tell his friend what the dream was. He gave the other guy an interpretation, but did he force that guy to say anything? No, there's no forcing of God going on here. Yes, he does deliver visions and dreams, but in no way does God ever take away anybody's free will in any of this. So, verse 15, and it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped, and returned to the host of Israel, and said, arise, for Jehovah has delivered into your hand the host of Midian. So he hears this, and he immediately worships God. What would be the way that he could worship God in this particular case? Prayer to God, a prayer of thanksgiving, the praise, the speaking to God, the praise and the thanksgiving and the adoration that he has is an act of worship. Prayer is an act of worship, and so that's what we have here. He's not offering a sacrifice right there next to the camp. He's not going to be singing a song and letting everybody know he's there. And so what we have here is this action of worship is the praying and the thanksgiving that he gives to God. So and then he goes back to camp, and he's like, guys, we're going to do this. I'm confident now that we're going to be able to take this. And so he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, verse 16, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. Okay, so I want you to understand you have these lamps, the ability to shine light, but they're in these pitchers so that nobody can see the light. Okay, so the light is hidden, but they have the lanterns or the lamps within the pitchers, and they have a trumpet, and there's 300 men, all of them with trumpets. Now think about this: when you have an army, the trumpeters are a very tiny fraction of the army. And so consider what these guys are going to do. They're going to go, all 300 of them, they're going to go and blow a trumpet. And if there's 300 trumpets, how big is that going to indicate that the army ought to be? Except the 300 trumpets are the army, but the Midianites don't know that. Okay? So verse 17 said unto them, look on me, and do likewise, and behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall you do. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to the outside of the camp, and you copy me. When I blow the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then you blow your trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of Jehovah and of Gideon. So he puts God first, and he says that this is the attack, that Jehovah is with them, and also the sword of Gideon, that Gideon is leading them. And those two things were going to put fear into the minds of the men who were camped there. And remember, this is going to be at nighttime, so there's a lot of chance for confusion here in the dark. And what they're going to do is, you're going to see they're going to blow the trumpets, and they're going to break those lanterns, or the pitchers that the lanterns are in, and suddenly the lights are going to be there. And it's like lights appearing out of nowhere, and it's really going to freak out everybody in this camp. So Gideon and 100 men that were with him came into the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but newly set the watch. So they just set the watch. These guys haven't been there for very long. They haven't gotten settled in or whatever. Their minds are not quite yet fully focused on their job. And they blew the trumpets, and they break the pitchers that were in their hands, revealing those lights. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hand and the trumpets in their right hand to blow with. And they cried, the sword of Jehovah and of Gideon. Okay, so they did exactly what they were told. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. So these 300 men just stand there, and they break the pitchers, revealing the lanterns. They blow the trumpets. And so these guys think they're surrounded by a huge army, and it's dark, and most of them are asleep. And so they're all waking up, and they're all confused, and they're running around, and they're crying out in alarm, and just running in fear. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and Jehovah set every man's sword against his fellow. And what that means is that these guys were so mixed up and turned around, they started killing each other, because they didn't know they couldn't tell who was an enemy and who was a friend. And so they thought they were being attacked by millions, and so they were. They ended up attacking each other, and so the 300 men didn't even really get involved in the battle at all. And then it says, even throughout all the hosts. So this is that whole army. And the host fled to Bethsheba in Zererath, and to the border of Abel-Meholah, unto Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. So you have this attack that they think happens. They end up attacking themselves and fleeing. They rout the army with just 300 men, and they run, and they're leaving the land of Manasseh. And then you see here, Naphtali, Asher, those are 2 of the tribes that are on the other side of Jordan, that are up against Manasseh. And we haven't read about them being part of this yet. Like, they're not under the Midianite sway or anything, but they join in with Manasseh, and they chase after him. And so now you have Gideon's 22,000, plus you have these other 2 tribes, Naphtali and Asher, and then you have a huge host out of Manasseh, because remember, Manasseh is a very large tribe. So now you have a lot of people chasing after this fleeing army that's terrified by 300 men. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all of Mount Ephraim. So there's another one. Ephraim is one of the two half tribes. Manasseh is the other half tribe. And says, come down against the Midianites. Basically, come on guys, we're going to fight the bad guys. Come join us. And so they called to the people of Ephraim, and take before them the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. And all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and took the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. And so that's the people of Ephraim came and fought and joined in with Naphtali and Asher and Manasseh. And they're chasing after these guys. It's basically a big old hunting party now. They're going after this big army where they all joined in together. And so they did take the waters. Basically, they take this position around Jordan from the bad guys. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites. So when Ephraim comes down to to join in and everything, they take this position at Bethbara and Jordan. And when they do that, they take 2 of the princes, 2 of the leaders of this army, Oreb and Zeb. And they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb. And obviously they named it Oreb because that's who died there. And Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb for the same reason. And pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of Jordan. So the Ephraimites join in, and they're joining in. They immediately take 2 of the princes, and then they rout them. The Midianites are running away, and you have these 2 princes that their heads are brought to Gideon, who is leading this whole furball, if you will, to take out this army. So it's an ongoing rout. They're causing this huge army to run, and so now they've got all this help coming in, and it was only with 300 men that God was able to do this to help them win. But note, it doesn't say that God went down directly and slew these guys, although He's done that. God does not go in and make choices for these people, but He's the one that tells Gideon, you only get 300 men. And then Gideon comes up with the plan, and they enact the plan, and it's providentially that they are successful. And it's God working through people who are faithful to Him, doing what He says to do, and then it works out. That doesn't mean necessarily that in our lives, if we do everything God says to do, that we're going to have fame and fortune. That's not what we're here for. But it means that whatever comes, ultimately, the things that we find necessary in this life, which are spiritual health, our mental health, the love that we have for family and for the church, those things are going to be with us. And ultimately, the harsh things of this life, the things that maybe the bad choices that we've made that have put us in a bind, those things are temporary. And if we trust in God, ultimately following after God, turning back to God, the victory will be ours, and we will spend eternity in heaven. So that is chapter 7. That's a wrap on that. We'll get to chapter 8 another time. Thank you for tuning in. This has been another Swordmaster Publications presentation, and my name is Ernie Lawrence, and we'll see you next time.